Talk, 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 talk. Art of the Zodiac presents Talk, 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 Talk.
You know, I was thinking actually, I witnessed the eclipse from New York, so I got the 90% experience of it. And I was thinking about our previous conversations on eclipses, because this was the first time in a long time I had witnessed a total since I've been studying astrology, and how we were talking about time, like how moon represents the past and the sun has kind of a future orientation to it. It's especially because of its opposition to Aquarius, the side of Saturn, which is the future, as a continuum, there's a strong future quality to the sun for sure. And during the eclipse, I was just sitting around in Central Park, and there were all these school children like making all this noise, and there were all these people with the goofy goggles looking, and it was a chaotic scene. And my girlfriend came to come. She came a little late, came to witness the whole thing, and she said something interesting. She was like, the energy feels weird. She's like, there's something. What's more interesting, instead of looking at it with the goggles, is just feeling the atmosphere right now. It feels kind of weird. And I thought about how to describe it. And I said to her, I was like, doesn't it feel still? And she said, yeah, it feels really still right now, even amidst all of the chaos. And that sort of made me think about how eclipses function, how they can express in our life the symbolism of past and future kind of like crashing into one another, conflating, and almost creating an eerie stillness. And I feel like eclipses can just change up our timetables, like stuff you think in the future starts coming now, like, oh, I expected this to happen months from now or maybe a year from now. The eclipse happens and bam, it's happening now. And I think there's something, it's like a weird wormhole, it's like a weird travel thing, through time travel thing you go through with an eclipse. And I really kind of felt it when I was sitting there, and I was just like, no past, no future, this is just like right in the middle between the two.
Oh, I love that so much, because I've been thinking about these eclipses in a lot of different ways. But I love the idea of, and I think like the wormhole effect of which you speak just feels like time feels wonky when we're in the eclipse season, right? Like things feel either like, I feel things that happened like a week ago feel like they happened 5 years ago. And things that happened 5 years ago feel like they're resurfacing in this way that feels super present. And so like that feels very much alive to me. But hearing you explain it, of this moment of stillness, of the face off between the sun and the moon, and it's like the past and the present at this sort of equilibrium point, that makes sense. That's something I feel like
really. And if you think about it, the sun and the moon and all of the celestial spheres are what determine time to begin with. We have no time without the sun, and that is the watchmaker universe. But quite literally, day, night, hours, all of those things are determined by planetary motion. So when they get super insanely aligned, which is like, how statistically improbable it is based on the proportions of the size of the moon, the distance from the sun, that they actually line up so perfectly equally, is also another fascinating coincidence that we have, and that there's a lot of thought I can have on that. But that thing it does with time. And I heard an astrologer, Zelbo Dean, coolest name ever. She's passed away, but I followed her on Facebook. She described eclipses as bringing nonlinear change. So that's another really interesting. And so linearity is time, or it's the illusion of time, or our imperfect filters, physical filters, trying to understand this information in a sequence is essentially. And so I do think there's a weird sense of change coming in a nonlinear fashion. And I think that phrasing really fits it perfectly as well.
Just repeat it again. So I'm going to
nonlinear change, and linearity being akin to how we even view time. There's there's past, there's now, there's future. It's an incredibly linear, and it's a bit of an illusion. I mean, I think that like the more you study astrology, the more you're like, no, time is actually cyclical. Or even if you do gardening, you kind of glean that. But I think that it messes. They mess with the linearity of time, is what and the changes that come seem to come out like outside of the sequence somehow, and that's why it's so disorienting and weird, and you get that moment of stillness and eclipse where you're just, it's almost a little unsettling.
Yeah. You know, I've been thinking a lot. I don't know why. I feel like kind of bitter, maybe not bitter, but like, just going to roll out some more negative words, bitter, jaded, right? With this sort of onslaught of like pop culture astrology of everyone like, this is happening, like buckle up, all these big things are happening, or like, you know, or like the sort of character analysis of like, yeah, but it's because I'm a Gemini or whatever. I mean, they're really thinking in my mind of like, what is astrology to me, right? Like, what do I believe to be astrology? And like, I just keep getting down to this core of like, the best I can get is astrology is a way, it shows me, right, that in this sort of chaotic world, there is some sort of method to the madness, and I just can't explain it, right? Like that idea that like, oh yeah, like every once in a while, like there is this beautiful sort of eloquence to the universe that the sun and the moon align, and like that we have this way of tracking past, present, future, right? That we literally can bring the past up. I think that sort of time-based understanding is the best thing astrology's given me.
So is it kind of like finding some coherence, like symbolic coherence with what's going on now, with what happened before, and what might be potential?
Right. Like it's not even, yeah. Like it's just, there's something really beautiful about going, oh, like I see this moment, and I see this moment brings me back to that moment, and like there's something there. I don't know how it works. But like, there's something really beautiful. I mean, even just kind of understanding during this eclipse moment when things feel still, that there's like, okay, like something bigger is at play here. And I can trust in that, even though I recognize I also have control over nothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you agree at all, or do you have similar thoughts?
Yeah. I was actually reading, was his name Gregory Shaw, the guy who, and I don't know how to pronounce this Neoplatonist named Iamblichus. Okay. So he's he wrote about theurgy and the soul, and he was from a Neoplatonic place, and I was very influenced by a lot of what Rob Hand has said about him, and I started reading Gregory Shaw's book on him. I read a short article where Gregory Shaw, and I think that's his name, was talking about Iamblichus, who was bitching about astrologers in his day. And he was just like, they're these fortune tellers, essentially. He saw the majority of them as practicing this very cheap art, this very cheap tricks. And that wasn't, but then there was perhaps an argument that there was a higher astrology that most of them weren't really using. That was Shaw's argument in the paper. And so, I embrace the trash astrology because I love trash, and I love cheapness. That's just me, and I'm very trashy and cheap in a lot of ways. But I mean, at the same time, I get off on the big, deep stuff as well, and that's where I think the focus of what I try to do with like a client is. But where is the depth and what is the use? And I mean, it's an amazing question. I mean, like Rob Hand says, it's about self-actualization, coming into being of yourself, of your true self. And I think that the more I work with astrology, the more it shows me how much, how interconnected everything is. The damn interconnectedness, like what all the mystics always talk about in many different forms across the world, is how everything's related. The Hermetic dictum, as above, so below. I think it confirms that over and over again. So in one way, it's a spiritual path to study and see that confirmation of the interconnectedness of things. Yeah. And then I also think it also shows you that and this is a little bit Taoist, like there's your own flow and the flow of the universe, and aligning those two together. And that is what self-actualization is, in my mind. And if you're feeling that there's a problem with the flow and things are going really, you have no meaning in your life and things are going wrong, it might just be that you're against the general flow. So I think there's a flow to yourself that astrology can connect you to. And that's ultimately the flow of the universe, because that's what we're looking at.
I love that. I love that thinking. There's a calmness to that. I've just been thinking a lot about, right, like in some sense, our job is to like constantly see where the sky is. And I think it can also become overwhelming because there's this sense of just trying to capture the moment. This is a good time. That's a good time. This is a bad time, right? Like this sort of frenzy around it. But in these sort of larger ways of looking at it, I can know, astrology lets us know what the general flow is. And then we can, how it's hitting our personal chart is our own sort of personal relationship to the flow. And that's where the beauty is of going, okay, if things are really chaotic, maybe now's not the season to be doing this or that or the other.
Yes. And what is it the season for? I mean, I think sometimes it's good to, it can present you with an objectivity where if some area of your life is going a little bit crunchy, or, the flow isn't, you're still working through that a little bit, it can also show you where the flow is. Anyway, that's my like bastardized understanding of Taoism and how I relate it to astrology, like the flow. But there is inside and outside are ultimately the same. I mean, and it doesn't feel that way sometimes. And I'm not saying I'm always enlightened to that fact all the time, but astrology reminds me of that fact. And when I feel like things are going well in my life, or even I'm dealing with hard things, but finding meaning and finding purpose and finding inspiration in them, it's because, alignment is happening between inside and outside.
Yeah. And in this moment where it's nice, that's the beauty of astrology, right? Like we know that at least, I don't know, I feel like I have control over nothing, but at least astrology can show me what floated, like, at what speed and where I should be going. In a sense.
Yeah. And I mean, and the difficult planets, like the planets that kick your ass a bit.
Yeah.
In understanding the nature of that planet, whether it's Saturn or Pluto or somebody, you also understand a little bit of the antidote to that ass kicking, whether it's like seeing, reframing it archetypally, whether it's seeing the greater purpose or meaning or what you can develop or what you can learn from yourself from the experience. But it's like the malefics or the difficult planets can give you the challenge, which you feel externally and internally, but they also give you a little bit of the solution at the same time. If you follow that planetary thread, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. What is the oh boy, I'm getting choked out with incense, by the way.
What are you burning?
I'm just like burning like Nag Champa. Usually I do like frankincense, and I was like, wow, this is the first time in my life. And I could usually, okay. Side note there. That's a lot of incense. Okay. Okay, what is the name for it where you like take a little bit of poison to actually we were talking about this, like the type of medicine where you actually take a little bit of the poison. Huh?
Homeopathy?
Homeopathy. It's kind of like that, right? Like it's like, oh, in order for us to like get through Saturn, right? Like a difficult Saturn transit, we're going to need to like take in a little Saturn. Be Saturn.
Yeah. Be high Saturn, be your high self, and it might mean that you're a little bit of a killjoy for a while and you work really hard and maybe you got a little serious like furrow in your brow, but then you can get you can get the most, you can be constructive, you can be constructive with what's going on in your life.
I love that. Did you want to, so, okay, before there's going to be there is a break in this recording because we were talking about the element of air. And then I went on this like long journey to find this book. Should I read from this book right now? Please. And we can kind of come back to this air for the conversation. Okay. So this is from The Element of Air. Okay, cool. So this is from Joy Usher's book, A Tiny Universe. Hot in action. Hot may seem an odd choice for the element of air, especially when we are inclined to think of cool breezes and draughty hallways in winter. But this element's active quality is highly sensitive to inequalities in temperature and air pressure, and its constant movement demonstrates the desire to create moderation whenever extremes exist in the atmosphere. Air
Like
brings
Libra.
more change.
Like Libra.
Yeah. Air brings more changes in the weather as its power has been harnessed as an energy source since the day mankind created sails to propel ships and wind-powered machines to grind grain and draw water. In terms of physical speed, a hot response for air is not so much about the quickness of the body in reacting to danger or challenge, but is more central to the speed of the mind and how quickly a threat can be identified, a choice made, and a mode of action initiated when reading the situation at hand. The air element is often not visible to the eye unless it's stirring up the other three elements, fanning a fire, moving dust particles or leaves on a tree, or creating waves on water. And yet it is constantly in a state of motion, large enough to alter weather patterns and move mighty oceans, and yet tiny enough to enter our lungs and create the oxygen we need to survive. In the same manner as air interacts with the elements, the air signs react to external stimulus and sorry, let me repeat this again. In the same manner as air interacts with the elements, the air sign's reaction to external stimulus is instinctive and lightning fast, and their speed in being able to process information is breathtaking in its scope and understanding.
That's a great description. That's very cool. And especially that line about you only really see air when it's in relation to another element, it's interacting with another element. So a sense of reaction, interaction is inherent to its own, expression. And you know what she was saying, well, in humoral medicine from traditional astrology, air is sanguine.
Mm-hmm.
Which again is that warmth. Sanguine, you think of like rosy cheeks, and it's considered, one of the more positive humors. And air people can be, I guess, very social and connected, and maybe come off, with that positive vibe. But that's to think of it as warm. And you do notice, like, whenever a sun sets, even during the eclipse, the wind picks up. It's that sense of its sensitivity to changes in the weather and temperature and things like that. I also noticed when the eclipse happened, like the wind got really strong, kind of like a sunset, when the wind always kind of picks up when you block out the light a little bit. And as a source of energy too. Yeah, you can think of all of the elements as being related to energy. Like you have the wind power from sails, then you have hydraulic power from water, you have fire, that's combustion. Yeah. Earth, it could potentially be oil, which is also combustion. Maybe that doesn't suit. Maybe that doesn't fit.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting now thinking about, again, coming back to the place that started this conversation, that now, Pluto, well, it's going to go back to Capricorn for a moment, but we have, this Pluto in Aquarius, which is going to be there once it returns for like 20 years. And then we have like 200 years or something crazy of like this age of Jupiter, Saturn conjunctions in air. So we are in this sort of grand age of air. And so thinking about that as a backdrop to this Jupiter Uranus conjunction in Earth. And I love that you said it's kind of like the last gasp of Earth, and thinking about, thinking about something really sort of seem like the tumult, right? Like the fixed Earth being uprooted, but then also having like the air is having to respond to it. Does that make sense? Like the implications. And I think of two air as like dispersed, like it's something that we can't look away because it's going to like affect all of us. This isn't predictive. I'm just sort of, by the way, I'm just like riffing here.
Yeah, no, that's really, really interesting. Huh.
How have you do weekly horoscopes. How have you been thinking about, this Jupiter Uranus conjunction?
I still, in Earth sign, I'm still trying to find a way that the Earth is expressing and reflected in what's going on in the world. But Richard Tarnas in Cosmos and Psyche said that this conjunction, which happens, I think, every 14 years, maybe 15 years, something around there, tends to bring scientific breakthroughs. And the scientific breakthroughs that are really palpable right now is AI, but I don't see how that relates to Earth, really. That's where I'm kind of like, that I saw more as Pluto going into Aquarius than this conjunction, but maybe it does relate in some way. And what other breakthroughs have been going on scientifically?
I mean, there's the like space travel stuff, right? Like there was the Odyssey. What's the name of there was a moon landing. There was a moon landing recently. Wow, you can tell that I'm up to date on these things. I was just reading about this, and it's interesting too to think about the last time these two planets, Uranus and Jupiter, made a conjunction in Taurus, right, was 1941, which just feels like a loaded year, right? Which lots of big scientific changes, lots of big tolls on the earth, right? World War II, which brings us back to the conversation of sometimes the good things and the bad things happen at the same time.
Yep. Absolutely. And I mean, the World War II, okay, trying to look at the bright side, what all of our grandparents went through, not all of ours, but is that I think that after World War II, there was a real thirst for globalization because trading together meant playing nice. The sense of like, let's all, the EU formed out of this, like, let's never fight again, guys, and having these more globalized alliances, which I'm not saying are necessarily always a good thing, but I think that there's been a lot of peace during globalization, the era of globalization. I'm not saying there's always bad stuff happening in the world, but some historians have made the argument that proportionally, there's actually been more peace during the 20th century because you can't bomb your neighbor if you're relying on them for the ships to come through to deliver oil to your country and all of this other stuff. So in a lot of ways, I think that what went on in Europe was, a global, mini global effort to defeat Hitler. And then there was a little bit more of like, let's just trade together. Let's not go back to that dark time again. Which in a lot of ways there have been some very good things with globalization. I mean, it has reduced worldwide poverty. Third world people have lived in much different ways than they ever have in the past. And like women's education and stuff across the world has also spread a lot too. So that could be one way of looking at it. Maybe a new way of internationally relating to one another when it was such a, at the time, global war. That maybe set the stage for just better international relations.
Totally. It's a preface here, right? When you go back to look at certain transits, I'm almost like hesitant to do so because there's that like, the last time this happened was World War II, right? And then there's this sort of like logical conclusion to, and this means World War III. And I just want to sort of give breath to that like astrology is a lot more nuanced and like, it's sometimes difficult to talk about these things without sounding like you're making giant leaps, which I'm not. Do you ever feel that too, that sort of hesitance where you're like, okay, like sometimes astrology can feel messy because we've all just like jumped to the conclusion without tearing it apart?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there've been a lot of other Jupiter Uranus conjunctions that have happened in history that haven't, so yeah, you have to look at them in that context.
And I kind of like the note that we were saying this though, this idea that, I mean, we are in a global crisis. That's sort of apparent, but maybe like this moment, like a particular event or something, right? That's like seeds are planted on this particular conjunction, and the air is this response. Like maybe the positive thing is that like that globally we all sort of get the the message is carried on the wind that we all need to take care of this thing.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Yeah. How do you feel? I don't know. I mean, we're having this conversation, but I mean, it's been a lot, right? Like this month is a lot happening. This is coming on the heels of this really volatile Mercury retrograde, everything, going passing the North Node, eclipses. Like, I don't know. What have you noticed in your life and your clients this month?
That's a really good question. I mean, during the eclipses, I mean, my clients, few of my clients had come to me with just, again, that sense of stuff that they didn't picture that was going to be happening right away, all of a sudden happening. Like one of my clients had a torrid one night affair after she's getting over a heartbreak. And she's like, I didn't think I was ready for that. But then it just happened and it was fun. And now I know I'm ready to start dating other people. It was kind of, yeah, I would just sort of say like unexpected things, which in my own life, I ended up buying a 1965 GTO, which I thought I was going to take more months to save up, but then the tax season was a lot nicer to me, and I was like, I'll just buy it right now. And it was like, so it was just kind of like weird, unexpected things happening now, which people were maybe anticipating might happen further down the line.
I love that. It makes me think I was sometimes like eclipses are really fun for that. Like I just said fun. I mean, they can be fun. That is the fun part of them, right? Like stepping into like the volatile time wormhole. But it also has me thinking, I don't know, especially something like this Jupiter Uranus conjunction. I think there's like a lot of hype around it. Like people are just like waiting for this moment of like, okay, like when's like my big cash out, right? It's the benefic with the like unexpected, and everyone's sort of like looking to their charts and like waiting for like the windfall. And I'm thinking about this a lot lately, and thinking about the beauty of maybe astrology is that like it's not. It doesn't play out how we expected to. And also this idea that like seeds are planted and that like, it's more subtle. Something might be manifesting now that comes to fruition, right? Like, I don't know, 10
maybe
years
it's an
from now.
idea, like maybe it's an idea that just happens around that time. And then later, totally. And I don't know. I mean, I don't really look at outer planet transits unless they're like contacting a point in my chart. I don't look at that conjunction and be like, oh, this is going to be, because it's in this house. If it were on something, maybe specifically, I would look more into it.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Although as somebody who has a midheaven at 19 degrees, I was really feeling these eclipses.
Wait, 19 degrees Aries, right?
Yeah.
Oh, shucks. And that's also on the nadir. Well, no, 19 degrees was the solar, but the lunar eclipse didn't hit it. Interesting. So that would be, Zell Bodine, who I quoted earlier, she said for a solar eclipse, if it's on a point, midheaven's a point, she said you can give it up to a year to the eclipse and then a year after the eclipse to feel it happening. So has there been like some big shakeups in your career?
Kind of. There's been just, I feel like there was a lot of shakeups in my life. I mean, this has been just a really wild eclipse season. Like I moved across the country and like am reconfiguring my life. And I definitely felt like, and it's interesting because I don't think about Chiron so much. I mean, all due respect, but unless Chiron is like speaking to something very loudly. And I thought it was interesting that Chiron was at 19 degrees, like conjunct this solar eclipse. And I don't know, I felt like the day of it. And then of course, when Mercury went to 19 at that point, so this past Monday, I just felt from me, there was like this almost like moment of like cathartic, just like, I don't know, I was just like sobbing on the eclipse. And it felt like this really, and not like, did you ever have a really good cry where it actually feels cleansing. It's like you just like you're like it's like a good acupuncture session or something where you're like crying so hard. Like I feel like I'm like you're crying and I imagine it being like I'm wailing, right? Like this is what you would do in like the mystery traditions. You would just get together and just wail until you're empty and all of the like really fuzzy like chemicals like bubble over your body, and it's a sort of euphoric experience. It was that kind of like deep cathartic crying. And I say that because I know like a lot of other people were doing that too. And so I guess I'm getting off myself so personally here though, but it does feel like there was something about this solar eclipse that felt like gutting.
Interesting. And also your midheaven is in your 9th house. So you just traveled across the country. I mean, like, I wouldn't call that a short journey. I know people are like, oh, 9th house is like a different country, but this country has a lot of different countries in it. And I'm sure LA is a really different country than Detroit. So, I mean, a lot of that eclipse may have been the move, and how that is changing with your career, because I don't know if there are different things happening for you in LA, you're working different places, or you're seeing clients in a different way, or I can only imagine it would affect your career.
On the day, I think it was the day of the eclipse, actually, I got accepted to grad school.
So in the house, girl. Okay, there you go. What are you studying?
Therapy.
There you go. Okay, that's what I'm talking. That's what I'm saying. Did you expect, like, was this something where you were like kind of planning it out, or just sort of you applied? It kind of you maybe didn't think you'd get in, or how did that?
It's funny. It's something I've been thinking about for years. But this working on Eclipse stories, when I came to LA, I realized just like at the end of this, like right at the start of Eclipse season, I realized this grad program I've been looking at for years now was possible is now possible because I'm in LA, right? It wasn't really possible when I was in Detroit, New York. So I applied last minute and suddenly got in. So that's exciting.
That's like, because when you move to LA, and like every time I talk to you, I think you do some big life change where you're like, oh, this is happening, I'm going to be there. It's like it's really fun. And like I think a couple of times ago I talked to you like, oh, I'm moving to LA. I just kind of so when you were moving, you weren't thinking, oh, this is the plan, I'm going to do this, so you did it.
Nope, and then I had no plan.
That's what an eclipse does, nonlinear change, and things that that's what I'm saying. It's crazy. That's really, really funny. I love that. Yeah, big change.
It's funny
your
because it all.
Yeah. No, yeah, you talk.
No, I did. It was just this is maybe a learning moment too. I have my Aries Libra MCIC, right? 3rd and 9th house. And so that Taurus Scorpio was happening in my 10th and 4th house. And there were some big 10th house 4 things that happened during that eclipse season, but I was just like kind of bracing for it. And, I thought like, okay, cool. Like I've been through that area of life, right? Kind of sleeping on the ICMC axis, because you do that with your own chart. You just don't think about it. And when we first had the first lunar eclipse that was like on my IC, like that's when my life imploded. That's when I was like, shit, like I need to move. Like it's sort of all those seeds were planted, and it's been these eclipses that have just been sort of bringing this sort of change. And so it's interesting to think that this MCIC, like speaking to the angles of a chart, has actually been much more potent in those areas of life than the 10th house.
Yeah. And the points, like we were agreeing earlier, are going to be a lot more eventful, especially with the angles. It's like that stuff is really, really manifests physically. Like, in your outside world, you see it very, very vividly. That's a fabulous example of the eclipse. That's a really, really fabulous one. And, the eclipse hit my Mercury in my 1st house. and Mercury rules my third house and my sixth house. And my Mercury in Aries, particularly from a health vantage point, relates to my neurological system in my brain, which is a big health problem of mine. And then recently, for a number of years, I always suspected I had a mold issue, but I was also like, I'm already putting out 10 fires right now. Like I have that's just one I'm going to deal with later. Like I have Lyme disease, I have this, I have thyroid, adrenals.
Yeah.
So I kind of put that one on the back burner, and then worked with a practitioner maybe a couple of weeks before the eclipse, and turns out I have mold problems, and it's like sixth house, the illness house, and Mercury in my first house. It's a very health orientation, and she's like, yeah, here are your mold issues. This is what you have to do to deal with it. So that back burner thing all of a sudden came to the front, and it's like, now you have this this whole other onion in your health, layer of the onion in your health that you've kind of really officially uncovered, and now have like a protocol for dealing with. So that's sort of how I've seen this eclipse hitting me.
Yeah. When you say mold issues, do you mean specifically like mold in your house, or like do you mind sharing?
Oh, no, not at all. You know me, I'm like a boomer. I could talk about health all day. But so it turns out, I don't think the types of mold that the really problematic one that I have is aflatoxin, which is apparently found in grains and nuts. So it's more food exposure is my problem.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's probably going to mean a major radical change to my diet and avoiding them while also pulling out whatever I can of it.
Well, okay, that's very sixth house, right? Like literally it's changing up routine.
Got it. Yeah, rigid. Like that's dietary change. It means I might have to give up coffee, the last drug I'm on, but I can do it, And then, so diet, exactly. That's very sixth housey, dietary stuff, things to support my physical body, first house, to support my brain, because aflatoxins are probably causing neurological issues, Mercury and Aries,
But
again, I can't use it all the time with clients because they're a little hard to unless it's on the midheaven. I might be like, there could be some changes happening in your career over the next year or so, a little bit, but sometimes it's like, it really comes into relief. Eclipses are a little, I'm not ready to fully use them yet because I don't feel like I have a handle on them.
I mean, that's the thing though, right? Like no one does. The nature of eclipses is that they are literally these shadowy spots. They're where the lights are extinguished. So I'm dubious whenever anyone tries to give me the breakdown of what's going to happen during an eclipse, right? The nature of an eclipse is that we don't know, right? Like there's going to be some ending, some beginning, right? Like that's why it sounds like obnoxious that we're so vague, but it also speaks to the beauty of when the luminaries go out, it's like, shit, who knows what happens in the dark?
Yeah, but that, especially when you say shadowy points, I mean, that speaks to the darkness a solar eclipse causes during the day. It also speaks, I mean, I think this is more Vedic language, but like Vedic astrology, but I think they call the nodes like shadow planets. I think that they're
the shadow grabber. Yeah, because the planets are grahas or grabbers.
Yeah.
And they're the shadow ones. But shadow grabber. Like I love that expression so much.
It sounds like some nasty guy you don't want to run into in a party. He's a shadow grabber. Watch out.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's perfect. Yeah. That kind of is maybe
you get cosmically fondled. Yeah. But yeah, no, but I think that that's actually a really important piece you're bringing into the eclipses. And what I'm learning from the conversation is, if the sun gets extinguished, so does our consciousness. The light of consciousness gets extinguished. And maybe, and the eclipses always have a strong connection to those shadow grahas. And it's like, what comes out of the darkness comes into light in a very, in a very vivid way. I don't know, but I think that that's an important part you're pointing out, and I'm still working with it a little bit.
And and it's interesting thinking about the relationship between moon, sun, right? Also body, spirit, right? And so thinking there is this but also past in future, right? It's interesting how like thinking, especially the solar eclipse where the moon sort of dominates the sun, right? And there is that idea of something, maybe the past coming into the fore, or how to say this, like literally the eclipsing of the sun, right? The eclipsing of like what we think we know. Just something
what we're aware of, what we can see,
mm-hmm.
Versus the stuff that we don't see that we know. And I think the way I think of the moon and sun relationship too is the moon has a really, I know this is psychoanalytic astrology, which a lot of people turn nose up to these days, but the moon does have an subconscious, not unconscious, subconscious quality. And just the reason why we see the moon is because of the light of the sun. So it's kind of like when you close your eyes, when you're in your subconscious and in your interior world, in your imagination, like the light that's in there that helps give you that inner vision is kind of a reflection of the life force as represented by the sun. I sort of think of it in a little bit of that way, that reflective light of what phase the moon is the same reflective light that we have that powers our imagination, subconscious, intuition in that way that like no one else but us can see. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I was thinking, I actually recorded a podcast episode I didn't do anything with because it was kind of late. And this is why I don't do anything like during the eclipse, like between eclipses, just was like chaos. But Brian Foreman, an astrologer friend of mine, we recorded an episode called Psychedelic Protocols for the Eclipse Season. And if you think about it, right, that is very psychedelic, right? When the light of the mind goes out and it's like that subconscious comes to the fore. Like
yes.
It is very psychedelic.
I just thought of something else too, but I want to get your opinion from this. Do you see the third house as representing friends, or is that just an 11th house thing? Because I feel like there might be, I may have heard of some traditional sources that talks about the third house as a little bit of friends, but what do you think? Is that not a third house thing at all? Or
No, it's my understanding that third house, okay, if we think about it, we talked about this, third house, the house of neighborhood, the house of like the temple, right? The house of the goddess. But it's like, I think third house friends are the friends that feel like your siblings, right? So like, because the third house is the house of siblings, but I think it can also be like chosen siblings, right? Like those friends you've just had forever, that there is that like familial quality with, whereas 11th house can be like everybody I know on Instagram.
Yes. No, that's interesting because I also before the eclipse, like a week or two before the eclipse, I got a call from a friend who I haven't spoke to in years, who basically unfriended me, but not on social media, in like real life unfriended me. And I was like all heartbroken and emo, like real heartbroken and emo for a while about it, because we'd been friends since we were 18. And then a couple of weeks before the eclipse, in between the eclipses, she calls me up and she's like, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. You still want to be my friend?" I know. So then I was thinking maybe that's third house because Mercury rules my third house.
Absolutely.
She doesn't live far away from me, like in a different part of the Bay Area, but like, so I was like, oh, that third house association with friends. And we used to be really, really close. That was also something I just never expected. Like, I was like, I'll see her at a party one day just by accident, but like, I'm never going to get a call from her. And it was just like, boom.
Wow, that totally makes sense. Also, just thinking about, you have Mercury in the first, right? So Mercury in its joy, right, in Aries. And I don't know, it's watching you, it's been really great because I can tell, at least I'm observing. I don't know, you're going to tell me, but it feels even though you're getting to the root of some health problems, you seem like you've had a lot of vitality. Like you've been doing a lot more writing and classes, and it feels like that Mercury has gotten a really strong, Mercury's voice in your first house feels like it's been really strong. And I'm wondering if that's also something that's sort of come up during this eclipse cycle for you.
balance. Thank you so much for recognizing that, because I mean, there were years I was just so sick, like I couldn't even read very well or do much with my brain for a long time. So as I'm getting better and my neurological health is improving, I do have more vitality, and I'm able to do more mentally. And I have been writing a lot more, and I published an article with the Evolutionary Astrologer, and I'm trying to put out a lot more on Medium. So it's like I actually have in the last couple of months been doing a lot more Mercury stuff. You're totally right.
I love that. And it makes me think too, sometimes with the eclipses, it's so, well, this is any astrology, right? And maybe this was his coming back to that sometimes the good things also come with oftentimes the really good things often come with the challenges. Like for you, it's like, okay, your Mercury's been getting louder, but part of that has been understanding how you need to take care of your Mercury, right? So like uncovering the mold issues, even though it's a challenge and it's like a bummer, it's also kind of like the solution, revealing itself at the same time.
Yeah, and completely. And I think that the ideal, like what we're talking about earlier about flow and feeling like your flow is meshing with the flow of everything else around you, is seeing when bad things happen to you, seeing the constructiveness and the positive side and the evolutionary side and the self-actualizing side to them. And that I think is the art of astrology, because as you get to know the planets, you can see their full spectrum, and it's like, yeah, you see the really crappy thing they did to you, but that also means you have access to all the higher gifts that can come with that planetary involvement. So yeah, totally.
Absolutely. Part of, I think, why the inspiration for this line of thought has been this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, right? There's so much hype about it. And I just see astrologers like, okay, because it's been such a difficult astrological month, right? There's been the eclipses aren't easy. This Mercury retrograde hasn't been easy. There's been a lot of stuff that's just been crunchy. And I think that a lot of astrologers are just trying to find something really bright. And this is a big thing. I mean, this isn't anything small, but there's this sort of moment of like, find the place where the gifts of Jupiter are going to show up in your chart. And that's not wrong, but I'm also just want to maybe like remind people that maybe this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction brings up something really big that at first could feel really devastating. It is the thing that you look back at a year from now and you go, holy moly, like my life has changed and I'm such an amazing place because of that thing that felt devastating in the moment. But that's actually how Jupiter was delivering the gifts.
Yes. Breakdown leading to a breakthrough. Definitely. Yeah. I think that's a great way of putting it. I think that is a really holistic way of looking at this, and not getting overly into it's a lucky planet, so it's got to be good. And it's like once you start qualifying things like that, and that's a trap that the traditional astrologers run into. Like, if it's debilitated, it's bad. If it's a benefic, it's good, and it's like sometimes it's just descriptive, it's just a neutral description of what's going on without it like having this like moral universe they impose on things. I love traditional astrology though, but they can do that and it starts getting religious and I'm like, yeah.
I mean, that's also late stage capitalism, right? Of feeling like, how do I get people to hire me, right? So it's like the constant like needing to tell people this great thing's going to happen. Look out for that. Mercury's going to drop your phone in the toilet. Which I don't know. My phone has actually taken a beating this Mercury retrograde.
Yeah. True. But Mercury like retrogrades, I instead of again, I'm trying to reframe things constructively, positively with the flow of things, is sometimes I feel like Mercury retrograde is like I'm going back over things. Absolutely. that I need to finish up, that were left unfinished when Mercury was direct and fast and going great, but it was still unfinished. And now that it's retrograde, I can finally, and again, the mold test, Mercury ruling my 6th house while it was retrograde, all of this was happening. I was kind of like, that was on the back burner. And now I'm kind of going back over it and and finally setting it straight. So yeah, I think that there are opportunities with that retrograde, of any retrograde, to actually, set the record straight in some area.
Absolutely. I need to stop saying absolutely. I have to get a new word, but thinking about Mercury retrograde, it's just a phase change, right? It's evening star. So Mercury is in the underworld, which feels very eclipsy, right? So there's something about bringing something from the darkness into light when Mercury eventually stations direct and emerges as a morning star. So just thinking that is sort of inbuilt into that process, right? It's evening. It's like, I've been thinking about Mercury retrogrades as these built-in periods of mourning 3 to 4 times a year, right? So thinking about, okay, we could stop. Not only are we reflecting, but like, what is it we need to really sit with and have like a deep cathartic cry and let go of, and like really consciously visit the underworld.
Yeah, the psychopompous archetype. And the psychopompous is what accompanies your soul to the underworld. So it's kind of like he's accompanying the sun as it dies and as it's reborn. He's that channel that brings it to death, or probably brings it into reincarnation as well.
Yeah, it's the thought I've been thinking about a lot during this Mercury retrograde, again, because it's happening with this eclipse season, is I was thinking about the mythology of Mercury, right? So Mercury, and you can step in, you probably know more of this than I do, but on Mercury's first day of birth, right, steals cattle from Apollo, the sun god, and creates the lyre, so gives the sun the gift of music, but then causes sort of all of this mayhem, right? Essentially, and then Apollo finally like tracks down Mercury and is like, hey, like, give me my cattle back. And Mercury is like, cool, have them back. And Apollo's like, but we're missing 2 of them. Mercury's like, no problem. I made a sacrifice to the god. Here's 12 parts. And at that point, there were 11 gods. And essentially, Mercury was like, hey, 11 portions plus me, I'm the 12th god. So this idea that Mercury, where did my camera go? Okay, there we go. Different camera. Welcome to the world. But essentially this idea that Mercury, speaking of, I love it. I talk about Mercury being a trickster and like turns my...
Okay. I know, that's actually really funny.
I didn't even, literally my screen just moved. Okay. That's hilarious. Thank you for making the point, Mercury. But so Mercury declaring himself the god. Anyway, we think in traditional astrology that a planet, when it gets too close to the sun, which is what happens during Mercury's retrograde, it gets really close to the sun, it merges with the sun, and then eventually moves out and becomes visible as a morning star. But we're like, oh man, that planet's debilitated. We say it's being burnt out by the sun. But Mercury is the planet that travels so close to the sun all the time. And I'm thinking about also like Mercury as the trickster is just kind of like trolling the sun. So during Mercury retrograde, it's like, if we think about the sun as like our solar ego, this idea of like, we know where we're going. This is our conscious light. And Mercury is like, but do you? I'm going to steal your cattle. I'm going to just fuck with you. And I think that there's that sort of charm about Mercury retrograde, is that we're kind of all sort of forced to face our egos in this way.
Wow. I love that. And, and Mercury, therefore, is Cazimi the sun more than any other. No, not more than any other planet. The moon would be Cazimi the sun.
Well, the moon, but besides the moon, right? Yeah, Mercury.
Besides the moon, it's Cazimi the sun, which is a point of great strength. Huh. Yeah, no, I love that. That's really good.
Yeah. I just think I was like, oh, okay, so we're kind of getting trolled about. But the question I have for you, maybe,
to go back to the Mercury and Apollo. So he steals Apollo's sheep, and Apollo is a herdsman. Yeah. Kind of metaphor for the sun being the leader of the planets a little bit, like herding the rest of the solar system. And then there's that 12 number of like, no, what was that 12 again? Like the 12.
So there are the 12 gods in the pantheon on Mount Olympus. That's interesting because in that story, it's like Zeus is the father, so the sun's actually not in charge, which is kind of interesting to think about there. But I like where you're going with that. I want to spend more time with this.
So at a party the other night, they poured my cup so much it was overflowing, and I was already too drunk.
And I don't remember all of what I did, but there was definitely karaoke, and I may or may not have danced on the bathroom countertop, which feels like no big deal, but I brought the like microphone into the bathroom and sort of created a crowd around me.
But then as I was dancing and I was already way, way too drunk, my friend kept coming in and bringing me more drinks.
At which point the bartender cut both of us off. I don't actually remember this, but this is what I was told by numerous people the next morning.
When I woke up in bed the next day, there were two other people in there with me, and we were all deeply intertwined in my heart-shaped waterbed.
And I had like the worst hangover ever, but somehow it felt worth it.
Literally hangover. That's hilarious.
I'll let you end. We'll do one more. Sure.
Is this a new one or the same story?
Same story. We'll start to bring this to its conclusion. Yeah.
Okay. And so as I was hungover, I had to do my walk of shame in front of everybody in my neighborhood who knew what a hoe I was. And I was carrying all my clothes and stuff out of their apartment.
But you know what? It actually ended up well, because my favorite neighbors, Brenda and Martha, came over and offered to buy me a coffee. So we started the very late morning with lattes and scones, and it actually ended up being a really blissful day despite my really bad hangover. And also the like waterbed couple, we totally had more dates at the end.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. You rounded that off. It was getting really sordid, really debauched, and then you kind of put a nice spin on it.
See, I'm capable of upbeat stuff.
Oh my God. So good talking to you, Vivi.
Likewise, this has been wonderful, and have a gorgeous day.
Mwah.
There are no parents, no other adults, no one to interfere with the fun.